Today's show is sponsored by Spot from NetApp, the cloud automation platform that makes it easy to deliver continuously optimized infrastructure at the lowest possible cost. Spot helps customers get the most out of their cloud investments by automating cloud infrastructure to ensure performance, reduce complexity, and optimize cost. Their machine learning and automation scale to exactly meet application needs using the most efficient mix of instances and pricing models, eliminating the risks of over-provisioning and cloud waste. Best of all, their software works with leading cloud platforms, services, and tools so that you can simplify and automate your cloud infrastructure wherever your workloads and applications run and however you run them. Discover how leading companies, from cloud-native startups to global enterprises, are automating, simplifying, and optimizing their cloud infrastructure with Spot by NetApp. Check them out at spot.io/cloudcast, where you can find more information, quest a demo, or even start a free trial. That's spot.io/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina, as we finish up the month of June 2021. Hope everybody's doing well. Kind of a hodgepodge of things here in Cloud News of the Week, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So let's get right to it. First up, Microsoft continues on their spree of acquisitions in the security space. We talked a couple of weeks ago about them acquiring RiskIQ, and this week they acquired security startup Cloud Knox, Cloud KNOX, so sort of like Fort Knox, another company who focused on looking at how to restrict access to the cloud or resources that are available via the cloud. So Microsoft continues to grow their security presence in the cloud. I think I read it's about a $10 billion business for them at this point. So continue to be very, very large. And Microsoft continues to be the one cloud provider that really is making a bunch of acquisitions to sort of augment their portfolio and set of services. The second one is, for those of you that are familiar in the DevOps space, follow the DevOps space, the one of the annual State of DevOps reports is out. This one from Puppet. So the State of DevOps report for 2021 is out from Puppet. Puppet was kind of the original, sponsor of the State of DevOps report. It was always done by Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble, along with Gene Kim. For a while, Puppet was a sponsor of that. Then eventually it split off to Dora. Google published it at one point in time, and now it's back to Puppet Publishing, their own version of it. So always a good read, always a lot of interesting insight. And I think most importantly, it's always kind of interesting to look at the trends as they evolve year over year. So if you take a look at it, it's always good to grab the 2020 version as well, just for comparisons, or even grab the 2019 or 2018 version as well and kind of watch how trends evolve and kind of look at it from your own perspective, within your own company, within what you work on. Are you evolving with the what they call high performers or the sort of medium performers? Next one on the list is Clubhouse, which we've never really covered a whole lot on this show, but for a little while earlier in the year, end of last year, there was kind of a big fad of trying to create voice applications. Obviously, we've seen video have its heyday. It's still in the middle of a heyday with things like Instagram and TikTok and so forth. Clubhouse kind of got out there as a place to have audio-only conferences, and kind of an interesting thing, obviously live only. One of the things they wanted to do in order to be able to join the service was get your phone number, and obviously they wanted to grow their network, so they asked for all of your contacts to be able to get on the service, and unfortunately they have been hacked. And a lot of your numbers and your contact numbers are out on the dark web. So that was announced. So congratulations. Probably not anything totally new. Most of your phone numbers are probably out on the dark web somewhere anyways, whether it's from your credit card company or some other way. But Clubhouse joins the club, if you will, in losing your data. Wonderful thing. And then finally, Cloudflare wrote an interesting article this week, which is kind of getting a lot of buzz. We've talked about it before. It's called AWS's egregious egress. That's a mouthful. And really talking about network pricing. We had some fun a couple of weeks ago talking about AWS Infinidash and how it was going to solve the AWS network pricing. Obviously, that was kind of a farce and a parody. But AWS network pricing has always been something that, of all the things that maybe people don't love, it's the one thing that is still very expensive and doesn't seem to drop in price. So Cloudflare Cloudflare goes through and does sort of an interesting takedown of their pricing and kind of their profits and so forth. So interesting read for those of you that are doing quite a bit of work with AWS or looking at putting applications into AWS. Make sure you understand what you're going to be paying for, especially if you haven't necessarily worked in the cloud before. You don't really understand your network flows for your applications, whether those are ingress versus egress, whether those are between an AZ, cross regions, what you do with partners and so forth. Probably a good thing to start getting smart about if you're not already living with that day to day. So with that, we're going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Like I said, kind of a hodgepodge of things here and there, some acquisitions, some interesting stories, some new reports and so forth. And after the break, we're going to get to an interesting conversation, actually a colleague of mine, but kind of a beginning, kind of emerging guru in this space. We're going to talk about GitOps and some details around what is GitOps, where would you use GitOps, how is it applied for best practices and so forth. So we're going to dig into that after the break.
Today's show is sponsored by Okta, the leading independent identity solution. Okta provides best-in-class authorization so your customers and workforce can safely access what they need most right when they need it from anywhere. Organizations around the world trust Okta's Identity Cloud to sign in, authorize, and manage users, whether it's employees, contractors, partners, or customers. And with Okta's developer tools, you'll never have to build authentication again. Our customizable code blocks are flexible and future-proof, with easy-to-use APIs and SDKs, so you can do less coding and more shipping. Okta is dedicated to building the most reliable, neutral identity platform because it means protecting more than a login. Identity is protecting people, their ideas, their work, their brilliance. It's protecting your future with confidence. Learn more at okta.com. That's OKTA.com.
Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a real-time monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and distributed request traces from your cloud containers and orchestration software. Track the health and performance of your dynamic containers, apps, and services with rich visualizations and machine learning-driven alerts. Datadog's Cluster Agent streamlines data collection from large container clusters and allows you to auto-scale Kubernetes workloads based on any metric you're already collecting with Datadog. To start monitoring your container clusters today, sign up for a free trial, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And, one of the topics that we've been hearing a lot about, and obviously with, KubeCon and Cloud Native Con coming up not too far into the distant future as folks are starting to plan their fall calendar, that topic is GitOps. And it's a topic that we sort of covered a little while ago. I think when I first started looking at it, I really kind of misunderstood it. I thought it was sort of a past technology, but it's something that we're hearing quite a bit about. We get some feedback from people that they're interested in learning more and more about it. And so I thought, as we always do, let's go out and find some folks who have not only been working with this quite a bit, have expertise in this, and I'm lucky enough that one of my colleagues at Red Hat is sort of an expert in this. So very excited to have Christian Hernandez, Sr.Principal Technical Marketing Manager at Red Hat, works on the OpenShift team, but is kind of my go-to for GitOps stuff. Christian, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Good to be on. Thank you, Brian.
So give folks a little bit of your background. I know you've been kind of very hands-on, not only with GitOps technology, but just around this whole Kubernetes, containers, cloud native space for a while. But give folks a little bit of your background before we jump into this.
Yeah, sure. So I, as you said in your introduction, I'm currently in the BU, right, as a technical marketing. Before that, I was actually an SA, right? I was a solutions architect at Red Hat. I was actually, for people who don't know, I was actually the second OpenShift SA to ever be hired in North America. So this goes to show you I've been around the block a little bit in terms of cloud native architecture. I was only the second one to ever be hired. Before that, I was actually my background is mainly in operations, right? Operations, and later on, just after being in operations, was application delivery, right? Like delivery of the applications for where I was. So always been hands-on, always been been involved in delivering software from the get-go.
Excellent. Very, very cool. So yeah, this is sort of right up your alley because you've lived through kind of manual ways of doing stuff. You've seen the technologies around this evolve, and you've been really digging into this for the last, I want to say, almost the last couple of years. So let's start by talking about the basics of GitOps. Like, what is it? Like, how do you explain it to people? And maybe more importantly, like, technology always exists to solve a problem. So, like, what problems does it solve?
Yeah, so it's anytime someone asks me about GitOps, I always have to go back to the DevOps methodology, right? Because once you start talking about GitOps, a lot of the times people are like, well, aren't we already doing some of this stuff already, right? It's like this stuff doesn't sound new. I always have to go back to like DevOps and stuff that I was doing in my past, things with like infrastructure as code, right? Like, in my past, I was doing a lot with like Chef and Puppet to try to basically deliver software faster, right? Trying the DevOps movement and the DevOps methodology is basically breaking down barriers in order to deliver software faster, to be more agile, to be able to basically keep up with pace, right? So, that's all the all the things that you get with DevOps is actually exactly what you get with GitOps. So what differentiates GitOps from DevOps, right? From what these practices that people have been doing, and the difference is really quite nuanced. And I really want to go over the principles, right? The GitOps principles, there's 4 principles that you kind of need to keep in mind, right? One is declarative state, right? And a lot of people, this means that basically means infrastructure as code, right? Okay. I kind of want to distill that, right? So desired state is essentially infrastructure as code. Everything that you want your system, from the operations all the way up to your application layer, is that you want that desired state, somewhere, right? And that's infrastructure as code. And that code, right, that infrastructure as code, it brings me to my second principle is it needs to be in an immutable desired state, which basically means Git. So now you're getting into that keyword Git, right? This is where the Git and GitOps comes from, is that it needs to be immutable, meaning that the versions are immutable, and the only way to change it is to mutate that version, right? So you'll always have a history there. And then the third principle, and I think this is the differentiating factor of GitOps, is continuous state reconciliation. So meaning that this differentiates it from, like, let's say something like Chef or Puppet or like CI, where there's an event that triggers change. The continuous state reconciliation is there's always something there that will compare your desired state of your system to the running state and reconcile it. Meaning that there's a software agent running there that if anytime there's drift, it'll change it back. Okay. So this is what differentiates it, right? This is GitOps versus, rather than me just running a script to apply an application, right? And then the fourth principle is basically repeat steps 1, 2, 3, and how you operate your system, how you operate your infrastructure, your application delivery is done through these declarations, meaning that you're changing your workflows to, instead of being from the command line with kubectl or with SSH, is that you make it through a pull request. Okay. So that's from a 10,000 foot view, GitOps is essentially DevOps methodology, but with automation built in that will reconcile that.
Okay. So yeah, those were some of the things that as I was learning a little more about it, kind of jumped out at me. So, there was a part of it, like you said, that was, it's infrastructure as code. And I was like, okay, we lived through that, sort of a solved problem, not necessarily always in practice, but sort of a solved problem. And then we kind of got into the things that, like you said, differentiate it, which is, number one, you have this sort of reconciliation thing, right? So it's I desire a certain state, it goes off, it does its thing, but then, various things change environments, and is this automated thing that brings it back. And then the last piece was, even when infrastructure as code was coming along, you heard a lot of like, you want to get developers and operations teams using similar tools. You want to have source control. You want to have code repositories so you can do versioning. But this really kind of, we've evolved to the point where, Git or, GitLab, GitOps, or GitHub, the Git-based tools kind of have become the de facto way of doing it. And that feels like even a more of an evolution than we had before, which is like, hey, you should figure out some common tools, but Git has sort of become that thing, it feels like.
Yeah. It's really interesting where, people talk about, what's the GitOps tool, right? There's various like tools that does the reconciliation, but honestly, like what sits at the center is actually Git, right? It's those Git workflows. And I think that's what actually sits at the center of it. You're absolutely right. Taking those Git workflows and then bringing that up to your entire team, not just for the developers, not just for the SREs, but just like everyone in your organization now is working through these Git workflows.
Yeah. Let's kind of put this in reality for some folks. Let's kind of walk through a day in the life of how GitOps works, right? So kind of walk me through who's what's the role or the job title that's using GitOps. What are some of the tools that they're going to interact with? Kind of step me through that whole, I don't know, day in the life, if you will.
Yeah. There's always there's no what's always funny to me is that I see people on LinkedIn putting DevOps engineers. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? Like, because DevOps is a culture, right? It's not like an actual position. And the same thing, with GitOps is like there's not a GitOps team, right? It's actually like a culture, a way of doing things, right? And so a day in the life is really almost mirrors what a day in the life of what a developer would go through, right? So I always say that people just starting getting into GitOps is like, look at the developer workflow. Now let's bring that up into the entire organization, the entire infrastructure. So things that developers do, things like, okay, well, I want to code, I want to make a change. I do a fork, right? I fork a repo. I make a change in my fork, and then I do a pull request. And then that goes through a process, right? That goes through like a code review. That goes through, goes through blame, right? And when I say blame, I mean like that Git workflow, right? Where it's like, okay, well, like this person, you need to fix this, or else it breaks this, or right? Like you go through those workflows. And then finally someone then approves that. And then finally someone merges that same workflow that you have for your developers. That day-to-day is going to look the exact same, but now for everyone, right? So now instead of just a developer doing that, me as an operations guy, I go, okay, well, I need to spin up a new instance, right, of Kubernetes, or I need to spin up a new VM. I need to make a DNS change. I need to scale this application. That goes to that same workflow. That goes through, okay, well then, let me check out that code. Let me make a pull request. Let someone else review it. How is this going to affect everyone else? And you go through that. It's that same process that developers have gone through traditionally, but now the whole organization goes through that as well. And then also you can bring other people into it, right? So it brings that visibility. Is okay, well, I'm going to make a change to my container image. Let's get security in here, right? Let's send that, let's tag security on this as a reviewer and have them look at it. It goes, oh, hey, by the way, the security guy goes, you need to patch this because there's a security vulnerability, or hey, you opening up this firewall is not going to fly, whatever it is, right? Now you get that visibility, and you're able to then tag people and have different reviewers from different organizations, different lines of businesses. And so the day in the life really just look at the day in the life of a developer, and really that's what you're looking at. But then for your whole organization.
Okay. And then like oftentimes from purely like a technology or a tools perspective, I typically hear about one of two things when I go look for GitOps stuff. One of them I hear is a technology called Argo or Argo CD, and then sometimes I'll hear things like Flux or Weave Flux from Weaveworks. Like, where do those types of tools fit into that workflow? Like, what's their role, or what do they do?
Yeah, so so when I got started with GitOps, I worked with a tool called Argo CD, right? And the idea of Argo is that you can point Argo to a Git repository, and then once you point out to the Git repository, the system that Argo is running on, for example, a Kubernetes cluster, it will always keep those in sync. So it's essentially when I was talking before about the agents, is those tools. So things like Flux, things like Argo CD, they are those agents, right? They're software agents that 10,000 foot view, very very simply put, is essentially it keeps your cluster in sync with whatever Git repo you pointed at.
Okay. And I heard you mention, as you were talking about that, you mentioned spinning up a Kubernetes cluster, you mentioned a VM, you mentioned bringing in the security team. It sounds to me like this isn't, so like DevOps kind of evolved to be, it felt more ops than dev. It often went, infrastructure as code. This seems like, because you said it kind of overlaps developers, this is something that can be applied to kind of anywhere in the stack, if you will, right? I mean, there's nothing that limits it from, being infrastructure only or applications only or security only, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So that's what really, I always think of GitOps as really a refinement of what we're already doing, right? It's like the things that we were already doing, except, okay, well then now let the Slack actually bring this back up and let's go do it through, for your infrastructure guys, your security guys, you hear about a DevSecOps a lot. That's even a part of it, right? So taking, really building the automation around DevOps is really what GitOps is. And it's applicable across the board. That's what it aims to be, at least.
Gotcha. And that makes sense. What are, we talked about kind of the day in the life, and that it very much mirrors some of the principles we've seen before. But we're now seeing, GitOps conferences, we're seeing talks at events. Like, what are some of the early use cases or some of the kind of applicable things you've seen companies trying to do with GitOps, maybe that was, different than what they did with DevOps? Or, are you seeing certain unique things happen, or is it really just a maturity of the tools and now certain use cases are more applicable?
So it's actually a little bit of both. What's funny is that, when you first start talking about GitOps, it's like I said before, people are always, it seems familiar, right? Because there's always, I was doing something kind of similar to GitOps in my previous job, right? Before I came to Red Hat. I saw this talk. I think everyone's seen this talk, or most people, I don't want to say everyone, have seen the talk with Chick-fil-A talking about how they did their mass deployments of their clusters, and it was all centered around Git. Mm-hmm. It's been these practices that that's been kind of going around, and kind of people are we're kind of already doing some of these things, and it really now became to the point where I was like, well, let's just standardize what it actually means, right? Like what? So now I think that with the coming of Kubernetes, right, and the popularity of Kubernetes, it made the refinement of DevOps and GitOps so much easier, because then now you have a way to operate Kubernetes in that's cloud native, and so
that was sort of one of the early ones I heard was folks that were spinning up a lot of Kubernetes clusters. They were giving each team, each application its own cluster, but they wanted every underlying cluster to be exactly the same, right? So they wanted that declarativeness. They wanted to be able to track it. They wanted to be able to version control it. That was one of the early ones I really heard about.
Yeah. Well, and also deploying to a fleet of Kubernetes clusters, right? And that application deployment really, I think it really spawned off the need to, you have a CI/CD process. And it spawned in the need of like, okay, well, I have thousands of clusters in some cases, right? With Kubernetes, I think people have moved away from having like the giant Kubernetes clusters to now to, many smaller clusters.
Right.
And so that came from that need. The need is like, okay, well, how do I, one, deploy to, hundreds, even thousands of clusters? And two, how do I keep them all in sync? Three, constantly in sync, right? And so a lot of these practices came up, and then eventually, if you talk about the history of Argo CD. So like I was, I'm really into Argo CD. The Intuit guys, the guy, Intuit's the one that started. They started Argo CD, but they actually started with that need, right? That need, I have thousands of clusters. I need a way to constantly keep them in sync, constantly deployed, right? And easy to use. So that's it's really a distillation of practices we've already been doing. So
right.
I've seen some interesting things out there. I think really the two cool stories that is one, the Intuit one, right, where it's like they had a need, they built a tool that, hey, this tool is cool, let's open source it. And also the story of Weaveworks, where actually the term GitOps was coined at Weaveworks. And the story I read from Weaveworks is, how they came up with it is that they actually had an outage. So for those who don't know, Weaveworks used to be able to host things on there, right? Before they used to use Mesosphere, and obviously they went to Kubernetes. They had an outage because someone accidentally deleted a whole region, and they were back like in 30 minutes. And then the CEO, what I found funny, instead of getting mad, he asked the questions, why did we come back so fast? And he was talking to his SREs, and essentially his SREs were explaining the whole process of how they got things done. And he coined the phrase GitOps. He goes, oh, that's kind of like GitOps. And that's kind of where that story came from. So that's kind of another story that I like hearing. It's like, hey, we kind of just talked to our SREs. What are you guys doing? Hey, let's bring that practice. Let's bring that to the community.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we always find that when you've, you sort of used a technology in anger, if you will, you've used it out in real life. Sometimes that becomes the best thing to bring to market because you've actually, sort of solved the problem. You've lived through the warts. You've kind of, sanded off the rough edges, and it's been cool to see, the GitOps community sort of evolve between a couple of different technologies and, find where there's commonality between them and find some best practices.
Yeah, definitely.
I know you've been talking about, both, in this case, Kubernetes infrastructure and certain applications. Like, is there anything that prevents you from using it anywhere in the stack? I mean, does it tend to bias towards application teams or infrastructure teams, or do you find that like it's building, like the communities around these are building the pluggability so that, it doesn't matter where you are sort of in the stack, you can use this? Or is it still sort of biased sort of one way or the other in terms of up or down the stack?
Yeah, so it actually it favors SRE teams, right? Because the SRE teams are there to, obviously keep your application and your infrastructure, your business essentially, right, up and running. And it really favors the SRE teams a lot, heavily. So, but that is not to say that other it's not built specifically for SRE teams. It's just built for it just favors them a lot. You can take pieces of GitOps, right, and apply it to other other aspects, right, like operations. Again, my background is in ops. I did a version of GitOps in my past job. So like today, if I was starting today, I would definitely do something like GitOps, for operations. And for developers, that's for them, they just want to sling code, right? They just want to commit code, which is also kind of fits into what they're doing because they know, hey, to get my application published, I just need to, make a PR to here. And then, it just off it goes. So, most developers, they love that practice, right? They like, if I could just code and just commit it somewhere and it magically appears somewhere, that's all I really care about, which I think fits really well as with developers. So I think it works across the board pretty well. You do need a culture change, obviously, kind of like, same thing with DevOps, right? It's essentially a culture change in order to fully utilize it.
Sure. I know you get a chance to talk to a lot of companies that are either interested in this or implementing it. What have you found, or what do you recommend for people, as things to learn, ways to learn, right? I know you and your team do a lot of things of like building, labs and things on, learning on Katacoda and other places. Like, what are some of the things you found either that you recommend to people or you see the community recommending if people are like, I want to learn about this, I'd like to play around with it. Like, what are good starting places?
Well, since you mentioned it, definitely the Katacoda thing. Me and a few people on my team built a kind of like a getting started sort of thing with Argo CD. So if you go to learn.openshift.com/GitOps, that's a great place to go to if you're really hands-on, right? Like, so if you really want to go and play around with the technology, get hands-on, and actually learn, the benefits that you get by using something like Argo, using something like GitOps. And so I definitely, especially if you're a techie like me, if you really like hands-on, and it's like, hey, look, the best way I learn is by getting hands-on. That's definitely a great resource because it's a hands-on experience there. For companies looking for ways to, trying to figure out, like, is GitOps something that we can use in order to accelerate our application delivery? There's definitely a lot of resources out there. If you go to openshift.com/GitOps, I believe, there's like a one-stop there where, articles and things that you can look up. So that's definitely something out there that you guys could get started. Really, it's getting familiar with Kubernetes, getting familiar with Argo, and trying to find where does those two things fit in your organization.
Yeah. And we'll put a bunch of the links for these things in the show notes. I know there's some really good resources I've seen before around just learning Git and some other stuff. Last thing before I let you go, you have been involved with this emerging GitOps Con event that's going to happen just before KubeCon. Give us a sense of kind of what you're looking forward to at it. Some of the topics that people are probably going to cover. Just kind of give folks maybe a preview of what might come in a month or so.
Yeah. So I'm actually part of the Open GitOps working group in the CNCF, right? So we're a SIG that sits under the application delivery SIG, so a sub SIG. I'm not sure what you would call that, but we put on our first GitOps Con in virtually, and now we want to do it as a day zero event with KubeCon. So it's a hybrid event. So what I'm looking forward to is seeing everyone in person first and foremost. But we are focused on the CFP is open for those who you want to submit CFPs. It's still open. And what I'm looking forward to is user stories, right? So we had a focus on user stories on like, hey, how I use this to solve a problem. And I think we're going to continue that. I think, I'm a big fan of show me how it works, right? Don't just talk about it. So, I think we're also going to have a big focus on user stories and success stories. We're also going to have, people from Red Hat, Weaveworks, CodeFresh, right? We're all, putting this as a, it's cloud native, right?
Yeah.
KubeCon sort of thing. So, GitOps Con is the same way, right? We're going to be representing there. So, hearing some of what, some thought leadership from those companies, right? So, not only from Red Hat, but also from, CodeFresh, definitely Weaveworks, right? They've been leading the charge with GitOps for a while now. So I think hearing everyone's stories and hopefully seeing everyone's faces at KubeCon is going to be awesome.
Exactly. Fingers crossed everything's still good. Well, Listen, Christian, thank you so much for the time today. Appreciate you giving us some insights into GitOps, some starting points for folks that want to learn about this. And like we mentioned, we'll put a bunch of things in the show notes for folks that want to go get your hands dirty with this, learn a little bit about it, see where it might fit within your organization. We're seeing some very interesting and positive results from companies that are adopting it. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Again, thank you, Christian. Folks, with that, we thank you for telling a friend about the show, spreading the word about the show, helping us grow the community, and giving us feedback on all the places where you listen to your podcast. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.